My highest value in life is growth. So combining that with Michael Jordan's quote where he's like, I fail many, many times. That's why I succeed. Like I discovered that one very early in the process. And so I think I just got addicted to like seeing myself get a little bit better each time that kept me going. Quick one for anyone hiring or scaling in 2026. Instead of spending thousands upfront on laptops, phones, tablets for new hires, Raylo Business lets you subscribe with flexible monthly payments. Keep your cash flow healthy for growth, free upgrades, and next day delivery, and give your team the kit they need. Is how a lot of founders are handling tech procurement in 2026. Link in the show notes to check out Raylo.
Welcome to The Secret Life of Great Leaders. Michael Bunting here. And today I'm interviewing Tom Hunt, who's the CEO of the podcast agency that's helping us launch and market this podcast. Tom, welcome.
I am honored to be here.
Thank you, Tom. And would you mind giving us a little bit of history? I mean, particularly if anyone goes onto Tom's profile on LinkedIn, you'll see he says that I know nothing, even though I've got a very successful business and I've failed 17 times. So could you just give us a little bit of who you are?
Yeah, the I know nothing thing, I think is actually quite a good summary of who I am because it's both true and false. And it also gives a nod to my back history. So I'll explain. So I 100% believe that I know nothing within like the frame of the whole world, but also within the frame of like what I do, which is like podcast marketing and business. I still think I'm a relative newcomer to this. But the reason why it's kind of true or the reason why it's there is because it's like a marketing thing. Like I feel like that's the anti tagline compared to what you would typically see on LinkedIn where people are like a thought leader or, investor, etc. So it's kind of there because I'm using it to get more attention because I have like the marketing knowledge and experience, but it's also very true in that I don't think I really know that much. And so that's why the tagline's there. In terms of what I actually have done over the past 10 to 15 years is start and grow small online businesses, most of which, as you alluded to, failed, 17 of them. And then Fame is the one that stuck, essentially. 5 years ago, I started the company because I had a podcast business that I was working at as head of marketing. Podcast went quite well. They really liked it. I left and they became the first client. And then we just have rolled out the process to other clients. So that's my background. I would say like marketing and management are like my two skill sets or like unique abilities, as people like to say.
Fantastic. There's a couple of points I want to come back to. One is the paradox of knowing nothing and yet knowing. We have a chapter in one of our books called Cultivate Beginner's Mind. You've just summarized beginner's mind in a beautiful way. The second thing is the resilience. I'm super curious about just how do you pick yourself up from 17 online failures? That's an interesting piece, but also crucially, you lead 70 people remotely. And this is a podcast about leadership and the secret life of leaders. And, I'd really love to understand the secret. And I know that you know nothing, but the secret to leading 70 people already is a big task, but leading them remotely is something our listeners are all challenged with. Hence you see a lot of people wanting people to come back into the office because it's really challenging to lead in a traditional way when your people are remote. So I'm sure we'll wind the other two pieces in, but if you don't mind, let's start there. And I'm going to start with a weird question, which is, what is your conscious leadership philosophy? Like, if you were to define what leadership is to you and how you think about leadership and what a leader's role is, how would you do that for yourself?
Yes. Okay. So I would say my conscious leadership philosophy is based around a framework that I stole what I read in a book. Right at the start of the journey, maybe 2015, so a decade ago, I was just like churning through self-help books because I was trying to grow these businesses. And it's a very simple framework. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's called Autonomy, Mastery, and Purpose. And it's from a book called Drive. I'm sure you're very aware.
Daniel Pink,
exactly. And so when I read that, I was like, okay, it resonated with me because that's kind of some of the things that I didn't like when I was employed. And so I almost made the unconscious promise to myself that if I was to build a business, I was going to try to weave in these three things for the team because then we'd be able to build a healthy company. And so I think the first thing I'll say in response to your question about how I manage or supposedly manage 70 people well remotely is that I actually only manage between 3 and 4 people, because then they manage the rest. And so we can like zoom in on how I specifically manage those 3 to 4 people and how it aligns with autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If that's where you'd like to go next.
Well, I would love to hear about that. Just a reference for any listeners in our podcast who've listened to our previous content. Autonomy and mastery and purpose match. We've got 7 leadership practices we research and teach, green zone practices we call them, and 3 of them match. So autonomy is about empowerment. In our work, we call it empower others. Mastery is about creating a curious learning-based environment, allowing people to find and learn mastery. And then purpose is vision, creating a purpose and a vision that people can find their own purpose and vision within that bigger picture. So it's just as you speaking about Jed Pink's work, it fits 3 of them are key practices we measure and teach. So we're right on tune. But I'm super curious to hear how you manage those 3 things in your work, with those 4 people. And what does a good day and a bad day look like? Where do you fail? Do you take people's autonomy away unwittingly? Do you take their mastery away? What does a bad day and a good day look like for you?
Yeah. So I think, and we'll dive into remote. When you're remote, what this essentially means is that the face time you get with the people that you manage is constrained because you're not in the office and you can't do ad hoc chats. And it's constrained, therefore, to the meeting. And so with these 3 to 4 people that I manage, we have 2 core meetings, really 3 actually, but the third one is a leadership meeting where we're all there. So that's not a one-on-one. So we have 2 core one-on-ones. We have the weekly, it's just called the weekly meeting, which is like, how are we doing with the job? Then we have the monthly chat is what it's called. And so every person that manages someone has these 2 types of meetings. They're very well documented. We've refined these. And so the weekly meeting is about how the role is going. The monthly chat is about how their career is going and like more general. And what a good day looks like is when in those meetings, and this is the biggest thing I've been working on recently, is that I'm present. And I'm present and prepared. And so on the presence piece, I've literally had to, for both these types of meetings, turn off all the other applications on my computer, Slack, email, etc., because I would find myself when I'm having a bad day, like still listening and like contributing, but then replying to an urgent Slack message or trying to read an email. So that's presence. So it's good. It's a good day if I'm present. And then prepared, I have one doc where I have notes for every monthly chat for every person I manage. And reviewing that and making good notes is, I think, absolutely crucial to having a productive monthly chat, because when you remember something that they mentioned 4 months ago that they're trying to work on or learn or do better, then I think that has a really big impact. They really know that you're there to support them in their career. And so being present and being prepared is a good day. And then a bad day is when I'm not, for either of those. And that does happen, So does that answer the question?
It does answer the question. And what's really interesting, you're mentioning something we often ask our clients, how do you cultivate a great culture? Like, how do you do that? And we have this model we use called the 3 R's. Firstly, you role model it. You've got to role model a great culture. Senior leaders, and there's a whole process. The second one is you've got to reward and create accountability for the right behaviors, obvious. And the last one's the one you've talked about, is rituals. You've got to get your rituals right, and your rituals have got to reinforce the culture that you want. So you've beautifully spoken to these 2 core rituals, right? And then the third ritual is the team ritual. And what we often talk about with rituals is that rituals are crucial because they pick us up when we lose our way. Like, if I lose contact with one of my team members, the ritual brings me back, right? But
Exactly.
like family dinners are rituals, right? But I can behave badly within the ritual or well in the ritual. And you described that too, right? So it's not enough just to have a good ritual. It's also that you have to show up in a really good way in the ritual. I'm also curious because within the ritual, you've beautifully talked about behavior, so being present. But I'm also, with all the leaders we've worked around the world, like, we found that the really good leaders have a consciousness of what you're talking about. So you what we call your self-regulating, right? So you're helping yourself by turning things off. But they'll also have patterns of tendency. Like one of mine, for example, is unwittingly disempowering my people. Why? Because I'm the expert and I've got stuff to tell them. And it's one of my, what I call bad patterns. So even if I'm present and I'm doing the ritual okay, I can still behave in ways that unwittingly take away the oxygen in the meeting. And I'm curious if you have any awareness of that, which often shows up in our personal relationships too, those same patterns.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to bring in another book, which I'm sure you're also probably aware of, High Output Management by Andy
Yeah,
Grove.
don't know that one.
No, really? Okay, well, maybe I'll be able to actually teach you something here, Michael. So in
Yeah,
High Output
great.
Management by Andy Grove, he was the president or founder or like CEO of HP.
Yeah.
And the book is basically about management. There's 7 management behaviors he talks about. One is called meddling. And so this is when it's not your role, but you manage someone who's doing a role and you step in to do something. And so this is meddling. It's not always a bad thing. If the consequences of something going wrong are significant, then maybe it is actually a good time to meddle. But most of the time, meddling is not something that's productive because the outcome isn't significant enough to overcome the downside of them feeling disempowered in their role because you're stepping in. And so
Yep.
this is probably the biggest thing I find myself doing. Like I did it earlier today, where we're trying to get somebody who someone else manages to do something. And the person that I manage was in the process to getting them to do it. But then I just jumped in on Slack to explain why we really needed it to be done. So it happens a lot.
Right.
So that is something that I am aware of, but I'm a consistent offender of doing.
Yeah, excellent. When I say excellent, I mean that we talk about the stages of awareness in our work. Where we talk about what you've just done now is you're awake to the pattern, you're owning the pattern. So we often say a lot of leaders we work with are not even aware of the pattern. So in some ways I'm testing you in this podcast and you're just coming up, which is great. Like you're passing in a sense, because what does a conscious leader do? A conscious leader is aware of their patterns that derail them. They don't blame other people for when they act the pattern out. So in your case, you're not saying, oh, but I only do it when people don't know what they're doing, right? That would be a justification. You're not doing that, which is great. And then the third step is regulation. They actually regulate the behavior and slowly reduce it. And part of regulation usually is feedback. And that's what I was going to ask you next is, if I'm one of your direct reports, do I have permission explicitly or implicitly to challenge you when you start meddling? And have you been conscious about that and set that up?
Yeah, so I think I could be better at this. Other managers in the business have like sent surveys to their team members. And I think there's something about the fact that I'm like the business owner that I feel like I don't have to do that. But in reality, I really should. There is a question in the monthly chat. So in the monthly chat, meaning the ritual, we have 4 consistent questions. And the last one is, how could I be a better manager for you, or something along those lines? And so there's like, I guess, a little bit of explicit permission to give feedback there. But I think, I could definitely improve on that.
Yeah, beautiful. But again, still, I love the fact you've got those discipline rhythms. A lot of our clients don't have those discipline rhythms. Can I bring you? That's really great. I really appreciate that clarity and consciousness. Just as a matter of interest, we ask leaders, all leaders, do leaders need to walk the talk? And then they'll always say yes. Then we'll say, what's the talk you're walking? It's really great to hear and interview a leader who has a consciousness. And I even love the fact that you reference it's from a book, right? Which is really you're doing your own way. But nonetheless, you still have a shaped process around your leadership. And very often that's completely missing. There's just no shape or process. I'm just leading. Can I just switch us into, I'm so curious about I know nothing as a marketing brand and I know nothing as an approach. Can you talk to us how you came up, apart from the marketing brand, how do you carry that and how do you approach this idea of showing up or trying to show up knowing nothing?
To dig deep into that, like in some areas that I have spent a lot of time learning, like marketing management, I do actually think that I know like more than 90% of the world. Maybe that's my ego talking, but I do actually believe that. But the reason why I also believe that I know nothing is because I just know that's a healthy belief in order to keep myself in that top 10%. Because if I think that I don't know, then I'm not going to learn what I need to keep up or even to progress. So it's kind of like the paradox of believing both things at the same time, which is quite challenging at times, but useful.
Yeah, I got that. Okay. And what's it like for you when you genuinely meet a situation or a challenge in your business that you genuinely don't know? How does that feel for you? How do you respond to that? What's your typical reaction to that?
Yeah, it's happening. It's definitely happening now with like the age of AI because I'm not technical. And so having like seeing all these amazing AI things and considering about how it will impact our business is definitely like an unknown for me. How do I address that? I basically have, in my opinion, like 2 hours of good productive work a day. And it has to be in the morning and it has to be as soon after I wake up as possible and typically in combination with strong black coffee. And so that's the time that I use, ideally even structured, to like just explore stuff and try to learn stuff or try to get high value tasks done. And so to try and approach the AI thing, that's what I've been doing for about a month now. It's really just trying to self-educate myself on what AI is, how it works, etc. So I guess my answer is like, I just try and put the focused hours in order to educate myself.
Right. And then is there a particular point where you take action and it's how do you take action? What's your approach to taking action? And I'm particularly interested because you're like the poster child of try, fail, try, fail, try, fail, succeed, right? So
Yeah.
I have this assumption as I'm listening to you, which is almost textbook assumption that you're very experimentative as a leader and as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I think it's both the greatest strength and greatest weakness in that I'm very good at like getting stuff done, but that stuff is not always the right thing to do. So we have a value, maybe we'll get into that in fame, called action bias, which is really
Right.
just because I just always default to like getting stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good because even with the AI, I think there's a plan. And actually, I'm being a bit better now because I have a plan of what we could do, but then I haven't implemented it yet because I'm just waiting to see what happens. And so I'm actually learning a bit there, I think. But I always just default to, okay, what's the next step to do this? Even if I haven't really
Yes.
put in the right amount of time to decide whether it's the right thing. And in the early days of the business, that's actually a real massive strength. And this is why
Yeah.
Facebook changed their tagline to move fast to break things to move slowly with robust infrastructure or something.
Right.
So when you're smaller, it's an advantage because you have less to lose. Whereas when you get to a bigger size, you have more to lose and you have more people that are going to have their roles impacted by the changes you're making. So
Yeah.
it's a work in progress.
That's a really great point. I've never thought of it the way you've worded it, right? It makes sense of why innovation can slow down, right? Because you've already got the gold in a way, right? So you don't want to mess with it too much, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting. And do you guys have reflection learning cycles in your rituals? And we find a couple clients we work with that learn really well. They sometimes quite deliberate about it. They'll have literal, what have we learned in the last month in their rituals and what worked, what didn't work, how are we shifting? Are we deliberately curating information in the right way and learning the right way?
Yeah, that we don't, but that's probably an excellent question for the monthly chat is what have we learned in the past month? Because then
Yeah.
what we've learned will actually be documented in that one Google Doc we have. And
Yeah.
then we could collate those learnings across all the monthly chats. That could be useful. So in short, we don't, but we probably should.
It's interesting because we've set it up in our business. We've set it up where having worked with so many clients, really very successful clients, we try to come up with a conceptual framework of what actually happens when organizations learn well, really learn well. And we recognize there's these three key patterns we tend to see or failure of them. The one is they're excellent at curating their learning, what we sometimes call gathering the learning. So there's lots of different things going on in the business, but somehow they have a way for the key learnings to come back centrally and be somehow stored. So in our case, what we are doing is we have like a project management software where people just put in the failures and learnings and issues that they're coming across into a software, right? Now, bigger organizations are more challenged. Then we ask the next question, how do we process the learning? So we've curated it, but now how do we process it? Do we have a debate? Do we go into denial? How do we actually get to, or somehow find out what are the most important learnings that matter? And then the third element is we actually take iterative or deliberate action based on that learning. So we have commitments. So we may have a monthly meeting where we go, what did we learn? Let's discuss how we learned. Let's prioritize. Let's action. And the next month, we look at how that action went. So there's a rhythm of learning. So that's what we, just as an FYI, if it's interesting to listeners. And we even go
Yeah.
so far as to measure it because with so many clients say, we've got a lot of learning going on, but then we just keep repeating the same mistakes. We sometimes document it, but nothing actually happens with discipline in the learning.
Yeah, that's something that we should definitely look to implement.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Here's a question for you. As you say that, how convinced do you feel you'll do that?
I think if I can delegate it to someone who's going to do it, then it's going to happen.
Yeah. The reason why I ask is because in our work, we also try and reveal what's under the surface in commitments, right? Which can be important because you've talked about the love of learning, the love of experimenting, the love of sort of being agile, right? And yet what I'm talking about is somewhat disciplined in a way. So I would assume, that's why I'm just checking with you, when we ask what with these beneath the surface questions, we'd ask, does that feel restricting? Does it feel like you can't breathe even somehow when you think about that discipline? Does it feel there might be loss with that discipline? So your cognitive brain says, yeah, that's a great idea. And your nervous system says, stuff that. And usually we don't listen to the nervous system. And so we can commit to things that there's no action. And then we ask, why didn't we take action? It made sense here. But somehow some other part of me went, no ways, which is what I was curious about happening for you.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I think the reservation on my part wasn't because I'm scared of like the lack of process or structure in the company. I think I can't reconcile the fact that I love taking action, but I also love structure. And I think we're quite an organized business because I'm very into that. I think the reason why, but behind the scenes, I was like pulling back while saying yes to that question was because it's not something that I want to do in terms of like implementing.
Right.
We have someone who in the business who is absolutely perfect for implementing stuff like that. So our head of operations. And so that's like a task I would love to delegate, but wouldn't actually like to do.
Yeah. It's okay, good. And it just reveals for us, there's this fascinating area in adult development or how human beings change is that the expression from a guy called Robert Keegan said, sometimes when we commit to things, we're one foot in the accelerator, one foot on the brake at exactly the same time. I'm going to gym on Monday for sure, right? That's like, and then there's another one going, I'll find a way out of that by Monday, right? Or somehow. And true change or growth happens when we become conscious of the brake and we can begin describing the brake and we can begin to see, wow, there's a brake. It also happens in our personal relationships where we may have an intention to have a great relationship. And before you know it, we have an average relationship and we don't know how that happened. And often it's because fears of too much closeness or fears come up and we unconsciously sabotage things. And then we think it's just how life is, but actually we've done it to ourselves. And that's hence what I was trying to pick up.
Yeah.
So I think a last question for you around this particular podcast, I'm just interested in what was your process around the failing and then the not knowing what's next? What was that like for you? 17 times. Like, how did you get out of bed in the morning?
My highest value in life is growth. And so combining that with Michael Jordan's quote where he's like, I fail many, many times. That's why I succeed. Like I discovered that one very early in the process. And so I think I just got addicted to like seeing myself get a little bit better each time that kept me going. And then the other thing that was happening is that I kind of realized that I wasn't able to really be employed. I was like a very bad employee. And so I didn't actually have another option. So either try and make the entrepreneurship work, or I guess I would have had to go back to being employed. And that was like a very bad or very great thing to run away from because I really didn't want that to happen. So I didn't really have another choice than to get out of bed in the morning and to keep trying.
And how did you like financially survive it? How do you fail 17 times and not be on the street?
So I always had a tiny amount of savings. So I worked in the corporate world for 4 years before like quitting and trying to make the business work. I always kind of had something else that I was doing that would make money. So for like 2 to 3 years, I was like an ops, like almost like a chief of staff, self-improvement guru. And so that always paid. And then for the year before Fame started, I was head of marketing at a B2B SaaS company in London. So that I had a salary then. So it's probably only like 1 or 2 years where I didn't have like a reliable income. But then everything, like even though the 70 things failed, they still like would make some cash. You know, they ultimately died, but there wouldn't be zero revenue or profits.
Okay. And Tom, I'll ask you maybe a strange question. Why do you value growth?
I am not sure. Like, yeah, I really don't know. It's something that I was recently, we just had a baby. me and my partner. And she's like, literally all you're trying to do is like not be with the baby and either like go to the gym, listen to audiobook or work. And I'm like, yeah, that's because my primary value is growth, and my tertiary, the third value for me is probably family. And that might change in the future, you know? But so I have an awareness of what the values are because I've gone to like workshops and stuff.
Yeah.
But then I can't answer the question like why growth is higher than family at this time.
Right. Can I ask you a couple of exploration questions? With a question like that, I would ask two questions. What are you running away from, and what are you running towards? Those are two questions I would ask when someone doesn't know why they're doing something.
Yeah, I actually might have a answer here. I'm like the middle child, and my brother is like, and I'm like almost like not the problem child, but the one that would like always break the rules, like got caught shoplifting, you know, and then left the corporate world. Anyway, my brother is like much more reliable, like well behaved. He's also the first child, right? So he probably got more of my mum's attention. And then my younger sibling is a girl, so she obviously probably got more of my mum's attention. And so my thesis is that I'm just like struggling to have my mum be like, Tom, you're like, I'm really proud of you, you know, or to get more of her attention because that's baked in from the childhood.
Right.
And the thing that the one moment that kind of made me realize this was that one of those failures, I actually managed to sell for $17,000. And it was like a big thing. It took ages. I worked on it for like 2 or 3 years, 12 hours a day, every day. And then they were sending the money, and it went to my like personal bank account that I'd had registered ages ago. And that meant they sent a letter to my parents' house because I was like traveling. And it was like $17,000, like the most money I'd ever made on anything. And I remember I like text my mum being like, what, did you see like the check come through, you know? And she was like, oh, is that it? And I was like, oh, like the 3 years of work to get your approval didn't happen. So if I had to guess, like the growth value fulfills my campaign to get my mum's approval.
Right. So interesting. Do you know Gabor Mate's work?
No.
So one of the world's leading psychiatrists, he's an expert on trauma, childhood trauma and addiction. And it's really interesting. He talks about how we repeat our parents' patterns unwittingly while we're trying to resolve them. And then we re-injure the generation beneath us. Because so interesting as you describe your pattern, you're describing wanting the attention is what's driving the behavior, which is driving you away from the baby, which will then create the same wound in the baby, the identical wound in the baby that you're trying to resolve. Yeah. So that's how generational patterns occur. That's exactly how they all happen to us. Like for me, and if I think about my childhood, like my childhood was quite empty, second of 2 children, and that my parents were workaholics. Well, my dad was, and my mom was quite cool, very English. And so there wasn't enough connection in the home. There wasn't enough emotional nourishment in the home. And it's really hard for me to do that with my kids, 4 kids. But I have to be very disciplined to be present with them and give them attention because my default pattern is chasing like yours. But recognizing that if I start doing the chasing, that's exactly what my parents were doing, that wounded me. I don't want to repeat the generational pattern. It's nonsensical. I don't want to wound how I'm being wounded. And the other interesting thing about it is that you can't resolve a childhood pattern in real world. That's the wildest part. Because, you know, if you take the theory is that at some point you are already very successful, at some point your mom says to you, you're enough, you're amazing, I admire you. And theoretically what should happen is you are resolved, but you know, you're healed. But of course it doesn't heal us because the pattern cannot be resolved. It's not an adult resolution that can resolve it. It's a deep nervous system resolution. So it's really interesting. And then if I ask you the flip question, which is what are you running away from? All right. And I would guess, do you know what you're running away from?
I don't think so.
Okay. Here's a guess, but I could simply have been. But it's the flip side of what you're running towards. It's the emptiness. It's the feeling of emptiness and hollowness that comes from that lack of connection that you're describing in your childhood, that lack of being seen, is a profoundly painful state in the nervous system. And for most of us human beings, the moment we touch emptiness, we touch a kind of empty moment of our lives, a boredom moment, a moment there's nothing to achieve, the moment we with children is very often like that too, where there's nothing to achieve except be with a being that's not necessarily entertaining us, not necessarily interesting to us, and it's just work. being with them, right? And it's
Mm.
freaking forever. When we meet these moments in our lives, we also meet the unresolved pain in our nervous system, because it's like there's nothing to distract us anymore. It's just there. It's like the default condition, and it sucks. And who wants to be with that? And so then we chase unwittingly the very thing that we think is going to resolve it, because that makes perfect sense, right? The tricky part is we have this expression in deeper work. It's an unfulfillable contract. Like you're chasing a deal that you can never make or you can never win, which is so confronting. It's like, fuck. There is no, we're picking apart a little bit of your pattern. I'm grateful for you being open, but man, we've all got these patterns. But it's super interesting, because when we talk to clients about values, we often ask them to choose a virtue, not a value, because a virtue is a principle I can apply today that is no future. It's now, and it's only for now. And then it can start working on the being at a different level. So I can do...
What's an example of a virtue? Like
integrity is a beautiful example.
Got it, yeah.
Where there's no like, I'm not chasing integrity. I'm doing it now or I'm not. And then what happens with integrity is you begin to notice when you're faking it. You begin to notice when you're pretending to pay attention in a meeting when you're not. That's out of integrity. You begin to notice when you're avoiding indirect conversations. It's out of integrity. There's this whole range of noticing that occurs in the simple practice of a virtue. And a job of a virtue is to produce internal harmony. It's its primary job, interestingly enough. And when we're internally disharmonious, we end up using values to chase something. So sometimes we'll meet clients that are, say, conflict avoidant, and we'll say, what are your values? And they'll say, I'm kindness. And we'll go, well, kindness is going to keep you in neurosis. You're just going to keep avoiding conversations in the name of kindness. You're going to fake yourself, which is how the mind works. That's super interesting. I really appreciate you sharing that and being open to the conversation. And I think we can all relate to that. I have 2 sets of kids from 2 marriages, and I remember very distinctly the difference between first set and second kids was this. I was going somewhere. Like I wanted their childhood to be over because it was painful, and sort of like we even had our children 14 months apart so I could get that part over with. And now it doesn't mean it's easier, because I have a 27, 26-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 10-year-old. It doesn't mean that it's easier parenting the second time around. It just means that I'm recognizing it brings me more discipline in a way, right? It's like, be here, because there's no chasing. Like I remember when one of my books became a multiple bestseller in Australia. And I remember people coming to me and saying, your book changed my life. And I remember really, really examining how I met that. Your book changed my life. Because at some level, it was an ego dream. Like, oh my God, if I can get that, I'll be complete. And then I recognized the best I could do is kind of like gremlinly, like own it. Oh yes, I'm amazing. Look at me. I've done so good. And then I would examine that and go, how do I feel when I'm saying I'm so good? I just feel tight, miserable, small. There's nothing about claiming my victory that feels in any way, shape or form liberating, but then equally resisting or going, it's nothing. It's just good luck that I wrote that book. Didn't work either. So eventually I realized is that the only thing that's left is just the moment, and there's nothing to grab or claim. And it was such a weird moment. It was like the very dream I thought would generate the awakening. It's almost like, to use your analogy, my mom and dad would say, when it hit the bestseller mark, right, they would go, you are it, you are enough. And the angels would sing and the rainbows would go, and I'd be like, da-da-da. And there was no da-da-da. It's like, shit. And not only that, trying to kind of hang on to the da-da-da was even worse. It was even more painful. So you've mentioned like that's one of your values in the business as well, right? Growth, you said?
Growth obsessed. Yeah, we do.
Yeah, which are really your values, right? That would make sense. You're the founder. It's your business. They kind of your values, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I would pretty much all of them, yeah.
Yeah. I want to wrap us up now. I'm just curious. I'm super curious to hear your response to what you've just heard me share.
Yeah, I think I never made the connection between the wound from the parents being passed on to the child. So I'll tell my partner about that later. I think she's going to be, it's like validation of point that I need to be more present with the child. And then the other thing that I think is going to be useful for me is the focus on the virtues. When I did the workshop on like defining the values, the instructor is very passionate about things like integrity and honesty not being values, but being, I don't remember the word he used for them. But then being able to still use these things but as virtues that are not time bound, I think could be useful. And I think the one that I would try to focus on, at least in the short term, is presence, because that's going to help the partner and the baby be more happy.
Yeah.
So those are the two things I took out of your response.
That's beautiful. Like, just to give you feedback, it really strikes me how so much beauty there is in your curiosity and your growth, like a non-defensiveness is so interesting. And I'm sure any listener listening to this, because, you've not defended yourself, you've not tried to push it away, you've taken it curiously, and you're now interested in implementing something from that curiosity. And you can absolutely see it's a superpower in your leadership. Like, I'm just letting you know, it's quite inspiring and striking as I hear that, and even the fact that you're going to tell your partner to you're kind of setting up accountability for yourself in a way, right? To be more present with your own child.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, thank you. I've really enjoyed chatting with you, Tom. Is there anything you want to conclude? Like, you've done something really successful. Congratulations. You're a new parent. Congratulations. Sometimes I ask a final thing was like, if you could talk to the you 10 years ago and give that 10 years ago, or that younger you, some of the wisdom that's settled in your system now, what would you say to that one 10 years ago? If you offer them a piece of advice or a piece of wisdom.
It's probably just to enjoy it more, because whenever you go through the hard thing, you're like hating it, you're hating your life. But then you look back and it's always like, wow, that was amazing. Like the struggle was amazing. Yeah. And so it's probably to go back to the presence word, to just like try and be more present in that process, because when you look back, it's always like a good thing. So don't get too stressed about it in the moment.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and your sharing today, Tom. You've added a great podcast to the Secret Life of Great Leaders.
I appreciate it, Michael. I feel like I should be paying you for the therapy consulting session. But no, I really enjoyed that. It's definitely different from probably every other podcast appearance I've done.
Well, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you.